While American politics may be fascinating to some, it's just as often frustrating. It's a complex subject, often discouraging in practice, and challenging for even the experts. But you can't even hope to talk thoughtfully about it without knowing the fundamentals of the American political system. As part of an American University undergraduate course called Congress and Legislative Behavior, our instructor, Dr. John Kornacki, challenged us to share what we had learned. One of his students, Mariam Arif, suggested the idea of interviewing her fellow classmates. We all liked this approach. Another classmate, Josh Feldman, offered his technical assistance, and I, David Marshall Bradshaw, volunteered to narrate. The following is a series of interviews with student volunteers. What you see and hear is the result of our class's work.
Hello and welcome. My name is Mariam Arif, and on this special program, we'll be talking about the United States government. I worked along with my fellow classmates on this project to promote a better understanding on American governing institutions and their contemporary political context. We filmed this as the part of a class project for the Congress and Legislative Behavior course here at American University, taught by Professor John Kornacki. Here is a brief overview of this program.
When designing the federal government of the United States, the framers of the Constitution feared that a single political entity would gain too much power. In order to keep this from happening, they designed a government with three distinct branches that can check each other. The judicial branch is where we find the Supreme Court, but the main focus of this special is the relationship between the executive branch, headed by the President of the United States, and the legislative branch, made up of the two houses of Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives. The Senate is a 100-member body with 2 representatives from each of the 50 states. The House divides representation between the states based on population size. That means that larger states like Texas will have more members in the House than a small state like New Hampshire. The relationship between Congress and the President has always been uneasy, where both sides share and compete for power. The Constitution gives the President certain powers over shaping public policy and getting legislation passed. First, in the annual State of the Union message to members of the House and Senate, the President may recommend for Congress's consideration certain measures to be taken. Second, if Congress passes a bill that the President disapproves of, the President has the power to veto or reject the legislation. If the President vetoes a bill, it is considered dead unless the Congress has enough votes to override the veto. This legislative move requires the support of at least 2/3 of all representatives in the House and Senate. 19th century presidents often adopted a passive role, limiting themselves to administering the laws Congress enacted. But modern presidents have defined their role as chief legislator and have tried to exert strong influence over the Congress.
Now, let's move on to my interviews with each of the students who participated. Our first topic is a very simple one. What is the primary function of the United States government?
The primary function of the United States government is basically to provide services to its citizens. So basically, defense functions, they fund the Army, the Navy, things like that.
To uphold the United States Constitution, so preserve liberty, freedoms, and the pursuit of happiness.
To represent the people, through making laws and just taking care of its citizens the best it can.
To provide for the common defense and the common good of the American citizenry, and others say just to pass laws to promote public welfare.
To protect the Constitution and make any laws necessary to further the country in a productive manner.
This is why we have the 3 branches of government: the executive branch, which basically it's everything that the president does. Then we have the legislative branch, which consists of the Congress making laws and things like that, legislating. And then lastly, we have the judicial branch, which it's composed of judges, and their job is to mainly interpret the law. So these 3 branches work together.
They also have things like constituent services, Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, stuff like that. basic functions that I guess a government would usually provides for its people.
The main role of the United States Congress is to make laws. How do they make these laws? And can citizens play a role in what kind of laws they make?
Congress makes laws through a long process that's necessary to ensure that the laws are good. Laws start off as bills.
A senator or congressman will propose a bill to their respective house. They'll then take that bill and it'll get referred to a committee and possibly even a subcommittee. The committee will then look over the bill, talk to experts, revise it, edit it, and make sure that it's the best bill that they can put out to the committee. That then gets referred to the full floor,
which is then voted on by members of the House and the Senate.
Congress makes laws through deliberation on the House floor, and the laws, usually are created in committees. And of course, citizens have every right to help make laws. They can contact their senators and congressmen and act as advocates for a certain issue.
Although they don't make their laws themselves, I think the United States and the American public, they have a huge role in influencing what their representatives and their senators are actually doing.
You can play a role by giving your opinion, not only giving your opinion by voting, but also giving your opinion by calling your congressman by going to its office.
And when representatives receive a lot of calls either for or against a piece of legislation, they'll tend to listen to your opinion and vote however their constituents want them to.
Groups have mobilized in the United States, so interest groups now play a large involvement in that through campaign donations. They lobby actively, try to spread as much information as they can. Public relations campaigns, they do as much as they can. Every American has the opportunity to be part of that.
When individual citizens and interest groups propose legislation to a member of Congress, the idea starts out as a bill. How, then, does a bill become a law?
A bill is an idea of a law that would best represent all Americans.
It's not a law yet, but what it is a senator or a representative will introduce a bill before the chamber, whether the House or the Senate.
It's co-sponsored, usually by a Democrat and a Republican, though sometimes bills are partisan. And then it goes through committees in the House and the Senate, usually the Rules, the Ways and Means, and then it comes out to conference committee, where both houses have to combine and hash out one version of the bill.
Most of the times, the House of Representatives is where bills are introduced, although it's not always the case. They're introduced by a Congress member, and then they are debated in various ways in various committees. They're marked up, and then once the House passes a certain bill, has to go through the same process in the Senate.
There's so many different types of bills. Bills are all over the place, and bills don't really come alive until a congressman really sees that a bill is needed.
They amend it a couple of times until it's perfect, and then it becomes a law by being voted on by the House and then the Senate, and then the president signs off on it.
The president will then has a choice of signing, making the legislation the law of the land, or vetoing, which means basically he can reject it.
The executive branch is headed by one person, the president, but the Congress is bicameral. What does that mean?
There's the House of Representatives, which is related to the proportional amount of citizens you have within your state. There are 435 total members of the House of Representatives.
And then the Senate, which is a little more aristocratic. The Senate contains 100 members. It's 2 per each state of the 50 states, so adds up to 100.
This is unique. A lot of countries like Venezuela, the United Kingdom, have unicameral, which means they only have one chamber only. The United States, we're very unique in the way that we have the Senate and the House of Representatives. So in order for anything to be passed, any law to be passed, both chambers have to agree.
Basically, they use one another to make laws and refer. They sort of act as a check on each other to make sure that the other is passing laws that are best, what it thinks is best for the people.
The work of Congress is carried out through legislative committees. What is the work of committees?
they look over bills. So when bills are referred to them, they look over them because they are usually for that specific sector of, I guess, the spectrum. And so they talk about and discuss bills and are experts on it.
Committees cover a lot of different types of issues. So I believe the issues, I'm not sure if they're exact names, but some issues that they cover.
There's the Foreign Relations Committee.
Defense committees, Homeland Security committees.
The Ways and Means Committee.
Finance, Foreign Affairs, Appropriations. Those are some major ones.
And within each committee, there's actually subcommittees. So there is, if you put them all together, it's a quite big number.
Personally, I just recently studied the Intelligence Committee's HIPC, which is the House Select Intelligence Committee, which is responsible for oversight of stuff such as the CIA and other important U.S. intelligence committees. And then there's other committees on the other side of the spectrum which are extremely important, such as appropriations, which that's how you get the money. And every bill needs money. Every congressman needs money. They're always looking for an edge like that. So the House Appropriations Committee is essential. It's key because it's a committee which gives everyone a different appropriates money.
We know that in order to write laws, members of Congress must first be elected. To be elected, they must campaign. How do election campaigns work for members of Congress?
So campaigns are long processes where generally the members try to raise a lot of money so that they can get their name heard throughout their district.
They're this huge machine that sort of churns and is always going. It's everything from television advertisements to speaking engagements to raising money, which is one of the biggest things. You can't run a congressional campaign without money. And so basically they'll go around their district or their state or whatever and talk to people, try to get votes, try to get people to agree with them on certain things.
One of their main goals, in the House especially, is to get reelected because they're up for election every 2 years. So the House representatives have to always be on their toes. They're always trying to get reelected. It's huge for them. And it actually makes them, some could argue, more responding to their constituents.
You have to represent your members. You can't just campaign and, I believe, not do anything. You have to represent your people.
Campaigns show that the representatives are still representing them. It helps them meet the people that they're doing their work for in Congress, makes them closer to the people.
And for Senate elections, sometimes they can be almost as big as the presidential election, it seems, because they happen only every 6 years, and it can be for an entire state. So, for example, the entire state of California and New York, with a very, very large campaign for Senate that will require a lot of money, over $10 million sometimes, to have to win. Whereas a small state like Rhode Island or Kentucky would require a far less sum of money in order to get your voice heard to the various people who live there.
And the ones that have been there for a long time, they're known incumbents. Those are usually, they're very hard to get out of office. So, the ones that have been there already, are a lot of the times are confident. They don't have to do as much campaigning as the ones that haven't been there as long.
Campaigning means communication with the public. To communicate with the public requires raising money. How do members of Congress raise money for their campaigns?
They can have special interest groups donate money to their campaigns through having organizations and special online organizations that are targeted towards different party groups.
They do a lot of big fancy dinners in my area because there are a lot of wealthy people. They do these big fancy dinners at big fancy hotels, but they also do little things like text message and sending text messages for $5, or a lot of mail-ins where you can mail in $5, or they do a lot of families come in and do bake sales at different school fundraisers. So there's a lot of different ways that they can raise money. There's
some basic requirements for federal campaigns. I believe the limit this coming election cycle is going to be $2,400 per individual for the entire campaign cycle. So you go to go to events and people write you checks for anywhere from $25 to $100 to $500 and so on and so forth.
They can do through PACs, which are political actions committees. Sometimes donate money, individual donations. They also receive different donations from interest groups, local businesses. So they can receive money from all these different areas.
These PACs can raise larger sums of money for candidates or for platforms or various issues that they find important, and there is no cap on these.
And super PACs. Super PACs are independent groups that are allowed to raise as much money as they want. We had recently the Supreme Court heard a case, the Citizens United case, which basically gave the authority for super PACs to raise as much money as they want because, according to the Supreme Court, money is considered a form of free speech. So this means that super PACs can raise as much money as they want and inject as much money as they want into their candidate that they seek to see.
Laws require the signature and approval of the president. Therefore, Congress needs to cooperate with the president in order to finalize any law. How would you describe this relationship?
The relationship is supposed to be one of which they check each other so that not one specific branch has too much power.
If the president needs a certain bill to get passed, I think it depends on that certain chairman of that committee, and he really needs that chairman to get passed, or I think it depends on especially the Speaker of the House or that chairman, as I said, of that committee, because he needs those people to help get votes to get that bill passed. And so I think it really depends on the issue of that time, whether it's going to be healthcare or whether it comes down to an education law or things like that.
At least the way it is right now, it's becoming a lot more contentious. They seem to always beat each other's throats. They're always fighting with each other. And that's sort of, I guess, the benefit and the harm of having, being able to have a president and a Congress of different parties who disagree with each other. They sort of act as a check on each other.
Today, if there's a Democrat who holds the presidency, such as Barack Obama, and the Republicans hold the House and the Senate split, it's very difficult to get something that everyone agrees on. Few bills are able to get done. So elections become key in that sense.
The key to pass legislation when there is a split between the House of Representatives and the Senate or even the presidency is compromise. Compromise is a big term, and what means by that is you have to concede some of your points in order to pass the majority of your legislation a lot of the times.
Another great thing about the United States is that we have checks and balances, or three branches: the judicial, the executive, and the legislative. They check on each other to make sure that not one single group has more power than the others. So because we don't have a monarchy, we don't have, we're not a communist country or anything like that. So we want to make sure that each one has independent power, but again, not too much power. So I think the relationship is unique. I think, I think ideally you want them to work together so laws are passed and the government moves forward.
Congress has the power to impeach the president. The House draws up files impeachment, and then the Senate holds the trial. The Congress also has the president has a power to veto Congress's bills. So if anything's proposed if anything passes both chambers of Congress, which is extremely difficult, the House and the Senate, then the president then has to sign that bill.
Given our understanding of how the president and Congress function, what would be considered the biggest change in the U.S. government since its formation?
I think the biggest government, to be honest, is a change in population size and the way that our country has grown. And also with that, in the change of technology and how people get their information, because now we constantly know what our government is doing, and that we constantly know what our congressman is doing and what our president is doing, and so we can constantly keep watch on them.
The biggest change is probably the expanded powers of the president, and even for that matter for Congress.
I would probably have to say the government has been greatly expanded. And I don't say it necessarily in a bad way. Many people look at expanding the government as big government, big brother, it's a big problem. I think you have to be careful. I think government cannot solve all of our problems, but I think government it's there to help us make our lives a lot easier. In terms of Social Security when you get older, welfare if you don't, if you're in the lower income gap, Medicaid for the poor, Medicare, for the elderly. So I think government is there to help us. I think, but again, going back to your point, I think government's information has expanded. I think that's the truth.
The biggest change has been the increase in the role of the President of the United States. And before, it was he was just seen as the executive, but now he's seen as the people's leader.
I think the biggest change in the U.S. government since its formation is the power that the courts have in deciding if laws are constitutional or not. When the United States started, although there was a Supreme Court that was set up, it was not formal at all, and it didn't have very much power. But in 1803, Marbury versus Madison, which is a landmark case, established judicial review, where the members of the judiciary are able to rule on cases and decide whether or not they're constitutional. And this is very important because it allows them a certain veto power to an extent of laws that legislators may make.
I think that the largest change in the United States government since its inception has been the powers of the president. As time has passed, Congress is still extremely powerful. Congress still holds the power of the purse. I don't debate that, but the president has become a lot more autonomous. The president has taken a lot more power than I believe what was intended in the Constitution, though it may have been necessary to adapt to times.
There's a lot more focus on parties, and whereas before, like in the time of the founding fathers, there was less focus on parties. Now the House and the Senate can barely get anything passed due to party ties. Nowadays we are involved in a lot more foreign policy than we were. One of the founding fathers, I'm not sure which one, always suggested that we remain, I believe George Washington, stay neutral on foreign affairs, and I think that had we took his advice, we might not be in some of the pickles we're in now.
I would like to thank Professor Joan Kornacki for supervising, Josh Feldman for directing, and all those who participated and dedicated their time for this special program. I'm Mariam Arif, and thank you for watching.